Stream got canceled. The Twitch seemed to be down. So I'm sort of hoping the Twitch is up by now, but we will see. I'd be interested in seeing if Twitch was up or down at this point. But I guess we'll know pretty soon. It was kind of funny last night. I went on for about 15 minutes with 0 viewers, just like I had no idea what was going on. So anyways, now hopefully it's working. Hopefully it's back up, and yeah, we'll take a look. So this should be interesting. What I was interested in looking at basically was, I was basically interested in looking at the games from last night. That's what I was curious about. But we will see. We will see what happens. I guess I'm sort of curious too. I also am still nervous because I want to make sure that the Twitch is working. But yeah, we'll see. Okay, all right, it's up. Cool. That's what I was worried about. Anyways, Twitch is back up, and I was interested in looking at the games that were supposed to be last night and the games that are supposed to be this morning. We'll have to skip the lesson part today, just because I have games to catch up on. All right, so let's take a look. This is Spring's game versus this is Spring's game. We'll take a look here. Yeah, sure. This is a Sicilian defense. Sicilian defense with an early queen to a4. Queen to a4, interesting. Haven't seen this before, to be completely honest. Or queen to h5. I think this is probably not going to be playable. But it should give a kind of a good demonstration of kind of what to do to improve. So how does Black capitalize on queen to h5 out of the Sicilian? It's a good question. Basically here the eval shifts. What's kind of interesting about this is that it doesn't technically shift the eval the full half point. Looks like a change of about 0.47. But yeah, this queen to h5 facing off against c5 looks like an improvement or basically looks like a move that's ambitious for white, but easily refuted. Easily refuted for Black. Knight to f6 is not the refutation. I think the correct move here is probably e6 or something that moves development forward. But let's take a look. So I guess I would say that e6 or d6, those tend to be the strongest moves for Black. With d6, yeah, the c5 pawn is defended. That seems like the top priority. Knight to f6, which hangs the c pawn, it does not seem to be an acceptable option. So instead, knight to f6, queen to h4. Hey, good morning, Forky. Thanks very much for joining the stream. Queen to h4, d6, knight to f3, e6, bishop to b5, bishop to d7, a4. Yeah, I guess I would say here, this is kind of the straightforward development that we were looking at. I think this is the way to basically challenge queen to h5. Queen to h5 against the Sicilian is definitely not correct, but the real question is, how do you capitalize on the fact that it isn't correct? What I would say is probably the best way is to just stick by, basically stick by opening principles, stick by kind of your best understanding of, I guess stick by your best understanding of, traditional chess principles, and don't get distracted by these aggressive attacks. If Black ends up making a move like bishop to c4 or making kind of an aggressive tactical threat, then you may have to respond to it. Hey, thank you very much for joining the stream chamber. Appreciate it. Thanks for joining. So yeah, this queen to h5. This is this is a refuted move, obviously, but not a move that not a move that should cause Black any concern. So I would say e6, d6, probably those types of things. Knight to f6 is not correct. Queen takes c5, knight takes e4, queen to d4. And this, this is a little better for Black, but I guess I wouldn't say this is the best option. From a fundamental perspective, this is just awkward. This is going to offer White continuing attacking opportunities. So I guess I would say, tactically speaking, maybe this works. But I have to think that there are better moves: d6, e6, those types of things. Knight takes e4, queen to d4, f5. And overall, this looks good. This seems to be a good play for Black. Bishop to e2, knight to b4, castles, knight takes c4. So this is an error for White. Basically, giving up that c2 pawn is just a tactical issue. Bishop d1 before castles, I think. Castles, knight takes c3. Cool. Yeah, that's Jen. Yeah, send your game. If you, I don't know if you're on the Discord yet on Concord, but just send it to the game submission section of the Discord. The Discord link. No, of course not. No, you definitely never have to pay for anything on the server. I think it's kind of yeah. So no, just send it on there. Send it in the game submission section. The line, it's a little bit long in terms of you know how long it takes to get onto the server. But yeah, no, feel free to yeah, feel free to send. Feel free to send on Discord, and yeah, awesome. So knight takes c2, queen to d2, knight takes a1, b3, pawn takes, and here black's got a big advantage. White, yeah, sure. I guess I was kind of curious. What are the calls for? Are they just, I mean, yeah, I'm happy to do it, but is it for like, I think they call it hand and brain or something, like, or brain and hand games. I was just kind of curious. I didn't know what how the calls worked or whether any of that. I just didn't know how that worked. But yeah, I was kind of curious, Alexandre. So yeah, knight takes c2, queen takes e3, or queen to d2, but there are better defensive opportunities here. E4, c5, queen h4, knight to f6. This is kind of an interesting way to play it, but I don't know. I guess e6 seems more fundamental to me. Yeah, so castles, knight takes c2, queen to d2, and then basically this opportunity doesn't offer, or basically this doesn't offer the best attacking opportunities for white. g5 seems to be a big tactical error. Bishop to h5 followed by queen to g5, I think mates, or win, wait, I think this mates, right? No, knight to f7, bishop takes f7, king e7, queen takes here, and white just has a huge advantage. So I guess I would say that in this case, white is probably, you know, somewhat, or white is basically won. But yeah, overall here, I guess I would just say queen to e2, g4, bishop takes h6, pawn takes, queen takes, knight to f7. Hey everyone, so I just wanted to introduce something, just since we have a good amount of people here. We have a chess tournament after this. There's basically going to be a tournament after the stream every day from now on. So we have a weekly 10 game and 5-second increment tournament starting basically right after the stream starts today. I'm just looking. Some of these schedules are unusual, but we basically have this starting at 9:45 right after the stream starts. So let me take a look. Interesting. Okay, let me just reschedule this one. I had to adjust the scheduling, so let me just do that again now. But yeah, yeah. There's also a simul Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern time. But let me just quickly set up the tournament now. But yeah, thanks. We have this this tournament. Let me just show you. It's just gonna take 1 second. Today I think probably maybe I'll play a round or two. But I'm not sure. I'm pretty busy. I have a lot of homework to do. So yeah. But we will see. Is my question. Yeah, so every day we were going to do a tournament right after the morning lecture. We could like lead right for the morning lecture into the chess tournament. I thought that could be fun. Yeah, let me just put this together. Sorry about that. Okay, cool. Yeah. So yeah, if anyone's interested, I'll start sending out the link. I'll start sending out the link as soon as the tournament is up and going. But yeah, this starts in this weekly 10-5. This starts in about an hour and 40, or about an hour and a half. Yeah. Guess the ELO? Sure. Yeah, I would be curious about that, Bishop Hurricane. I'm not sure how I would do. That's a good skill. Guessing the ELO of the players. But yeah, I'm always happy to take a look at that one. Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I saw there was a new program on that someone had put together on Reddit where basically it was evaluating who was winning. That was an interesting program. I thought that was also a cool idea. Yeah, Elo Guesser. I mean, I don't know. These things are kind of cool. I guess it's interesting to just test your guesses. But yeah. Anyways, I don't really want to look at this game after Bishop after basically this opportunity. Or I guess this game. I don't know. Well, yeah, no, but I mean, what are they for? Are they for chess? Are they for like hand and brain, or like what? I just didn't understand like what the calls were for. Is my question. Like I'm cool. I'm happy to do it, but I was just like okay. I mean, I'm just kind of confused, but I don't know. Okay, e4, c5, queen h4, knight to f6, queen takes c5, knight takes. But yeah, this is a tactical error by white. White needs to defend his c2 square. And yeah, I think most of this game is determined by tactical play. So I think we can kind of move on from this. I think there's not really much kind of strategic. I think I would just recommend, at this level, the most important thing is to just look and study tactics. Do puzzles for like an hour or two a day for like a month. Puzzle trainer, whatever you can use, and basically get on that as quickly as possible. So yeah, I think that's probably a good play. I think that's a good idea, and definitely recommend that. All right, cool. On to the next one. This game is from Cloudy Dino. Cloudy Dino is playing white against the Caro-Kann. F4 against the Caro-Kann. Okay, so this is interesting. F4 is like a fair amount down the list. This F4 basically. F4 is pretty far in terms of playing. Basically D4 as opposed to F4 is the main line. Just so we all know the mainline Caro-Kann. The mainline Caro-Kann goes E4. c6, d4, d5, knight c3, pawn takes, knight takes, bishop to f5, knight to g3, bishop to g6, h4. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine with that, Alexandre. I didn't know how it worked. I was sort of confused, but yeah, I think that should be fine. I've got no problem. I've got no problem setting that up. So yeah, I know that you want it, so I think we can do that. I don't see any problem with that. So basically putting pressure on this bishop is the main point of this Caro-Kann. H5, bishop h7, bishop to d3, bishop takes, queen takes. So pawn takes over queen takes here. This is the kind of the early main line. Knight to f3, knight to d7, h5, bishop takes to h7, bishop d3, bishop takes, queen takes. This is the most common mainline Caro-Kann. Bishop takes, queen takes. Cool. All right, so e4, c6, f4 is interesting. I guess I'm sort of curious about this. In terms of this e4, c6, f4, what does white do here? Basically, f4 seems to be an opportunity to, f4 seems to be an opportunity to challenge e5, but e5 isn't generally played in the Caro-Kann anyways. d4 also prevents e5. So like the added benefit of e5. I guess what I'm kind of curious about is like, so e4, c6, f4. This looks like it's this basically looks like it's, I don't know, worse for white. It seems like d4 covers most of the things that f4 would do. So let's see. f4, I mean, I don't know if there's even much theory here, but just in terms of looking at this, f4 focusing on e5 seems to be a... f4 focusing on e5, I don't think there's many benefits provided by f4 over d4. D4 controls e5, and c5, and f4 controls g5 and e5. And e5 I think is worthwhile, but I don't think that that g5 is worthwhile. I think d4 instead, focusing on e5 and c5. I think that's a better way to play this. So anyways, that's what I would think about. I think d4 is probably better, but f4 is interesting. Realistically, f4 probably also falls into that screening of moves that we shouldn't play. Look, if if f4 happens, I guess, I don't know. I guess this eval is fine. Let's look at the eval against d5, but yeah, this d5 is I think d5. I don't know. This isn't bad. So okay, sure. Let's say f4. Interesting. Interesting move. I'm not sure if it provides many advantages because these two squares, especially the g5 square, I don't think it's too important in the Caro-Kann. But yeah, interesting thing to look at. d3, d takes e4, pawn takes e4, queen takes d1, king takes d1, knight to f6, knight c3, bishop g4. Okay, cool. So here, I guess I would say that that black has an advantage after knight to c3. e5 was considered to be better. We're looking at the main line here. Knight to c3 is one of 3 games, or 2 of 3 games. But I think that that instead, I think that e5 is probably a better way to play this. That's what the engine says. On e5, the knight goes to d5 or g4. But yeah, I guess I would say it's up to kind of black to what to play here. Say knight to g4, and then king to e1. Okay, sure. I mean, this is fine. With the queens off the board, there aren't too many attacking chances on the king. But things like knight to c3, knight to f3, bishop to c4, this will end up being good for white. So, knight to f6, e5 is considered to be better than knight to c3, bishop to g4, bishop to e2, e6, h3, bishop takes, knight takes, bishop to g4, b4, bishop to e3, castles, e5, knight to d5, knight takes, d takes. Okay, so white's better. I guess I would say that white's just generally more solid in this situation. This bishop is a little bit displaced on this diagonal now. This isn't a particularly helpful diagonal for the bishop. The knight can look at moves like d7. The knight can look at moves like c5, rook to c8. But all of these, I think, should be reasonable plays for black. But white has been fine out of this opening. So this has turned out fine. What's interesting is, the different positional characteristics that come up out of f4 versus d4. c5 might be providing more of an opportunity in this game. c5 basically should allow this, it basically should allow black to equalize in the center more easily. In the normal Caro-Kann with d4, d5, e5, c5, this is a playable move for black. This is playable, and definitely pawn takes c5 is worse. So I guess that pawn takes c5 isn't really a legitimate threat there either. But just thinking about the different concepts here, what's different in terms of the pawn being on c5. Okay, so I would say instead e5. Maybe e5 is the way to play this. If you're looking at the Caro-Kann advanced variation, this is the move that's played. So I'm wondering if it's funny. Look, here's this thing that chess.com's engine does sometimes. If you play e5, then it says e5 is best. If you play d3, then it says d3 is best. But basically here, this is one of those things that happens in this situation where, basically this idea is I guess I would say this seems worse to me than e5. If you're just expanding in the center here, white should have a good position. Ideas like knight to f3, ideas like d4, ideas like c4, ideas like knight to c3, that should basically be fine. Bishop to e2 maybe, but I think overall here, this push to e5, this push to knight to f3, d4, that I think should provide good opportunities for white. But yeah, I sort of like this better. I don't think this pawn is overextended. And if anything, it will transpose into a French where, if black tries to undermine this, knight to f3 can be played, d4 can be played, you know, ideas like pawn takes e5, pawn takes e5, that could end up being good for white. But yeah, I think that overall this is you know, this is fine. I think that retakes on e5, I don't think those are a huge issue. But yeah, d3, pawn takes, queen takes, king takes, knight to f6, knight to c3. Yeah, it basically is an advanced version of the Caro-Kann. But yeah, so I would say e5 is probably better. Yeah, so e5 I think is a better way to play this. Knight to f3. Yeah. So yeah, that's my thinking. Basically, this is an advanced variation of the Caro-Kann with f4 supporting. If e6 gets played by black, then it turns into the French with d4, and if anything takes on the e5 square, then white can retake with the f pawn. So yeah, knight to f3 and pawn takes on e5. Yeah, I think that's better. So d3, pawn takes, queen takes, king takes, knight to f6. And I think basically here, you know, white should be solid. This is, you know, this is good for, you know, this is good for white. The queen trade basically simplifies the game a lot. Better ideas now are e5. But yeah, I think that should be good. E5, knight to d5, knight to g4. All moves, all ideas. So. Anyways, knight to c3, bishop to g4, bishop e2. I think white's now solid, and I think that this is, you know, this is just good for white. White's development is healthy. White has better control of the center. So black wasn't really able to capitalize on that f4 move. I think after having looked at this, f4 seems more playable. I guess I would play it along with e5 and basically, you know, try to transpose it into an advanced French. But yeah, that's interesting. Interesting opening. I haven't seen it before. E5, knight d5, knight takes, pawn takes, and this just sort of provides kind of an initiative for white, and kind of white is solid here. White's trying to move this position forward. I think things like g4, f5, knight to d5, knight to d4 could be good. King to e2 could be good. Rook to d1 could be good. And yeah, I guess I would just say in general, white's more solid. Knight d7, g4, bishop b6, knight. I guess I would play knight to d4 here, but I don't know. Maybe bishop takes b6 is fine too. But as white, I think that this is the correct general plan. Like, I think pushing on the king side here is a good idea for white. Things like bishop to d4, f5, f6. That I think is a good way to do that. So yeah, so I think that bishop to d4, bishop takes d4, knight takes d4, and then like rook e1, f5, f6. I think, you know, it's white doesn't have a lot of pieces here, but I think that white can basically try to create a kingside attack, and I think that's going to provide the best strategy for white in this situation. So bishop to d4, rook c8, h4, knight takes, or knight c5, rook g1. And yeah, I think overall this should be better. Pawn takes, rook to f1. Okay, sure. But I don't think this was the solidest. I think this is the right general idea, but I'm not sure this is the most solid continuation for this. I don't understand rook to g2. I don't feel like that's a necessary move. I guess it defends f2 a little bit better. Like if knight plays f2, then bishop to f2 can be played, and wins a piece. So basically, this rook to g2 is played to prevent knight to f2 in mind. But I don't think that knight to f2 is ever much of a problem. Like, if knight to f2 gets played, then you can just play rook to h2, and the knight has to go back to where it was on e4. So that's what I would say. Rook to g2, rook c6, h5, g6, pawn takes. Yeah, I think this is the right general plan. I think basically having white push on the king side here is the right idea. f5's good. F6, knight g3, knight g5. Okay, I mean, sure. But yeah, this I think this attack needs to be maintained. The attack gets neutralized for white after f takes g6. I think the better move for white is just to maintain the tension here. These pawns are very strong. Like if you can basically keep these pawns on e5 and f5 and well defended, I think these have the opportunity to queen. So basically trading this pawn on the f file for this pawn on the g file, that's not really something that benefits white. It takes away an attacking piece, so I think that basically having this pawn on f5 facing off against this pawn on g6, that idea is not super helpful for white. I would just leave it. Basically, leave this, leave this pawn structure as is, and the ideas that that the engine is coming up with here. So rook. Let's look at the engine line. Rook to f2, b5, king to d3, rook to f7. I mean, basically, white's gonna just kind of hold on to this, and yeah. Bishop takes, knight takes, but still never simplifying. Always maintaining enough attacking pieces on the king side, and here it was used at the very least to disrupt black's pawn structure. Now black has an isolated queen's pawn and a new target for attack for white. So anyways, I think this is good, and yeah, let's look. e4, c6, f4, d5, king takes. I think this is a bad idea. So instead, bishop to d3 should be good. Bishop to d3 should be an improvement for white, and with bishop to g4, I think that black doesn't really have all that much. So yeah, I think this was sort of not. I guess this didn't really have a great continuation to it. The black's play here was interesting, but bishop to g4. I mean, this simplification didn't really help for black in any real way. Bishop to d2 is probably what I would play, but bishop to b4 also. What does this threat do? Really, is the point. What is this bishop is not facing towards anything from white on the king side, and yeah, I think bishop facing on bishop to b4, facing on c3. You can probably play a3 and b4, but nothing particularly strong here. The knight's defending this knight, so why is the bishop? If the bishop trades off for the knight on c3, that's only going to be good for white. So anyways, a3 pushing on the bishop seems to be I don't know, seems to be good for white. White's not hurt in any way by the bishop taking on c3. e5, knight d5, knight takes d5, c3, bishop a5. Yeah, I think white's fine here. White's probably up by about 0.7 pawns, and white's looking at advancing on the king side. So in terms of looking at this game, f4 was an interesting possibility. I'm sure objectively speaking, it's not as good as d4 in the mainline Caro-Kann, but it led to an interesting position here, and it took black out of kind of the main ideas. I liked e5 more than I liked d3 here. I think objectively speaking, e5 is probably better. With e5, you can transpose into the basically the advanced French. And d3, pawn takes e4, pawn takes e4, king takes e4, knight to f6, knight c3. I think this is probably bad, and I think that bishop to d3 is probably a better way to hold this as white. So yeah, I think this isn't a great idea. I think instead, these continuations, e5, knight takes, pawn takes. This should lead to a situation in which white's up by a bit, and things are fine. So yeah, h4, knight to c5. Overall, these pushes are good for these pushes on the king side are good for white. Bishop c6, h5, pawn takes. All of this should be solid for white, and yeah, basically if white can maintain this king side attack, things should be good. So in terms of improvements for white, I felt like this game was played reasonably accurately. I didn't really think there were too many errors here. The opening was a little bit unusual, and trading off the queens early was an interesting strategy. But in terms of improving this, I think I would say that this kingside attack was the right idea for white. There are some small tactical improvements. The biggest positional improvement that I would make is I would hold on to this. So the biggest takeaway in this game, I think, is the simplification on the king side here. I think after pawn takes g6, there wasn't really much for white. Pawn takes g6, rook takes f1, and then pawn takes h7, knight takes f1. This continuation leads to about equality. And white's kingside attack is pretty much neutralized. Technically, white still has an passed pawn here, but yeah. Knight to f3, king d1, bishop to e3, knight takes. I think white should be okay, and yeah, I think that this wasn't really the greatest the simplification for white. White is equal or worse after this. So leave this structure alone is the main takeaway from this game. You've basically got a strong situation where you've basically got a strong situation where you're going to continue to attack on the king side. It's just important that you do it in the most efficient way possible. White's best ideas were like knight to e2, knight to f4, and then knight threats on e6 and d5. That's what played out the best for white, and that's what was the most solid there. So I think that knight to g5, knight to f4. That was a better way to play this. I don't think that was. I guess I would just say that's a stronger continuation. Keep this pawn center as it is, because equalization on this king side without too much compensation is not a good idea. So that's basically what happens here. Pawn takes here, and the situation is relatively equal and not that helpful for white. Leave the pawns on and be ready to play knight to e2, knight to f4, threats on d5, and yeah, white should be up by a good amount there. Anyways, I guess I would say that's an improvement for white. I think that overall that idea, knight to e2, knight to f4, that should be a situation in which white should be able to maintain a consistent advantage. Anyways, interesting game. Cool. Thanks. Thank you very much for sending it, and thanks, Cloudy. But the main takeaway from this game: don't simplify an attack if you don't have to. If you just keep things as is on the king side, basically you should be in a pretty good situation. All right, cool. On to the next one. This is the game from TK. TK is playing as black, and let's see. Cool. So TK is playing as black here. Let's take it from their perspective. And here they're playing against the Ruy Lopez. Ruy Lopez mainline variation with knight to f6, bishops on a4, knight to f6. I play the Archangel variation. I play b5, bishop b3, bishop to c5. That's the opening that I'm the most familiar with out of the Ruy Lopez. But let's take a look at knight f6 theory. Knight f6 is going to involve fights over d4 and d5. That's basically how this opening works. Basically with castles here, bishop to e7, rook e1, b5, bishop b3, and then the main ideas are going to be fights, basically castles here, c3 and d4 are going to be played for white in most main lines, and then there's a challenge between who plays d5 or d4 first, between white and black. So here, castles, c3, d6 here. At this point, d5 is already playable. D5 is the martial attack. Basically, this early aggressive attack by black, this opportunity to really challenge the center, is one way that black can play this. The martial attack, I think, is it gives white kind of an advantage, and it gives white tactical opportunities on the e5 pawn. But overall, I think that this is a pretty solid way to play. So knight takes, pawn takes, knight takes e5, and then knight takes e5, rook takes e5, knight f6. This gives white about half a pawn advantage. This is mainline martial attack theory, and basically what happens here is that black has good attacking opportunities and slightly better development, but white has a one pawn advantage and one pawn extra in the center. White's going to play d4 and get the bishop out, and then black's going to attack on the king side using the light squared bishop and the dark squared bishop. So overall, attacks on the king side here. I think this should be. I think basically this should be better for white. The material advantage is too large, but this is one way that black can play against the main line. Basically, the main line Ruy Lopez. Okay, so d4, this looks a bit early, but ideas like pawn takes d4 are probably good. This is the center attack. Okay, didn't know that's what that was called, but bishop e7. Bishop e7 is the closed Morphy defense, and then d4 turns this into the center attack. Here, black has a few options. Knight takes e4, or knight takes d4 is one. b5 is one, but the main line is pawn takes d4. And looking at the options, I guess pawn takes d4 is objectively the best. But yeah, interesting. I would say pawn takes d4 is probably the best way to play this. Bishop, this encourages this bishop to take on c6, which would be a good trade. But knight takes d4, which is the main line here, I think. Or actually, no, sorry. Rook to e1 is the main line here. Okay, interesting. So yeah, the engine is suggesting knight takes d4, but rook to e1 is the mainline variation. On this rook to e1, I think it should be b5 and d5, but let's take a look. Also, I'm curious to see what was played in the game. So d4 and b5. So pawn takes d4 is considered to be objectively better than b5, but b5 was played in the game. b5, bishop to b3. D6, okay. Also, pawn takes d4 could be good. D6 could be good. But yeah, I guess I would go with d6 probably. D6, supports the center. And now, now with d4 having been played, black can't play d5 in exactly the same way. D5 is playable when the queen can't get access to the d5 square. But with d4 already having been played, d5 is going to be weak because the queen and potentially the rook can attack on the d file to try to eliminate the pawn on d5. So castles, pawn takes, knight takes e4 is the main line. But again, we're sort of deviating from mainline theory here. That's sort of not what I wanted to do. So b5, bishop to b3, castles. Castles leads to white having a reasonable advantage. Instead of castles, I think it's better is like d6. D6 seems to hold on to the e5 square. But castles, pawn takes to e5, knight to g4, bishop to f4, d6, pawn takes, bishop takes, bishop takes, pawn takes. White should be up by about a few pawns here, and yeah, I guess what I would say is that this situation leads white to have a solid advantage. H3, knight e5, and white is better. Queen f6, knight takes. Okay, but white is solid here. This isolated pawn on d6 faces off unfavorably against this pawn on e4. This pawn is on the 4th rank. This pawn is on the 3rd rank. Neither can advance, but white's pawn is further advanced. It's got more center control. So yeah, overall here, I guess I would say this is better for white. Cool. So b5, bishop b3, castles, pawn takes, knight b4. There are a number of errors here. Better was d6 than castles, and better was knight takes e4 than knight to b4 here. D takes e5 also isn't considered to be the best. For white here, knight takes e5 is the best. This forces things to get simplified in the center before they, this basically forces things to get simplified in the center quickly. So pawn takes, knight to b4, bishop to f4, and yeah, these threats on e5. Okay, so white's better. White's better by about 2 pawns. Pawn takes, bishop d6, pawn takes, and yeah, knight to e5. White's just better. This pawn, this pawn basically holds on to d6, and that's big there. Okay, so anyways, bishop to b7, queen to g4. Black, I guess I would say just black is comfortable here, or white is just black is stable, but white is better. Yeah, and then knight and then yeah, knight threats on so bishop to e4, f5, queen e7. I think this ended up being kind of weak for white, or weak for black. I mean, I think that there were a number of errors made by black in this game. Let's slow down. Let's go back. A6, knight f6, bishop e7, b5, and yeah. So here you're basically still within mainline Ruy Lopez. I mean, there's a lot of games here. Bishop to b3, but the main move here is not castles. It's d6. D6 I think puts a straightforward improvement on this. With d6, you're successfully defending the e5 pawn. There's not much pressure in terms of castling. I think you just castle and basically pawns don't problems begin to emerge on this threat on e5. So I think you need to defend it. I think you need to play d6. In the d6 line, c3, castles, rook e1, sure, but everything in the center is holding. So castles adds problems with threats on e5. So yeah, bishop b3, castles, pawn takes e5, knight b4. Yeah, this is just worse for black, I guess I would say. I think d6 instead. D6 instead, holding the square on e5. That is better. So d6, c3, castles, rook e1, bishop to g4, bishop to e3, e takes, c takes, knight to a5. But yeah, I think overall here, this is, a better way for black to go about this. This idea, I don't know. Trading the pawn on d4 as opposed to trading the pawn on e5 for black is stronger. Okay, so defense on e5, and yeah, should be good, and white is better. So black should have played d6. This deviation from the main line caused a lot of problems. So bishop to b3, d6. This leads to a loss of about 1.7 pawns for white, and with the loss of 1.7 pawns, the situation is pretty. 1.7 pawns should be enough to decide most games. So playing a move that's 1.7 pawns worse as a deviation from opening theory is a real error. There may have been other opportunities for black to improve after this, but d6 as opposed to castles was better. So castles, pawn takes, knight to g4, bishop to f4, d6, pawn takes, bishop takes, pawn takes. Yeah, I think white here's basically has 3 pawns, 3 pawns in terms of compensation, but really just this e4 pawn facing off against this d6 pawn is favorable. That's the main point. That's the that's the improvement there, and yeah, I guess I would say this idea, this advancement of the pawn on d6, this is a this is just an overall bad simplification of the pawns in the center. Better ideas was so really just a deviation from theory. So this is a pretty high level game if you think about it, right? Both players played theory into the early middle game, and then one player deviates from theory. That deviation in theory causes a difference of 1.7 pawns, and then the player who gets the 1.7 pawn advantage wins. Just looking at this a little bit more, once this happens, white's got an advantage of 2.8 pawns, so that should be a winning advantage. This e4 pawn is much better than this d6 pawn, but let's see if it ever gets closer again. I don't think so. I mean, I think it goes basically somewhere around 1.7 pawns or more. Yeah, so interesting. Really a good demonstration of how deviating from opening theory can really cause problems in your game. So yeah, let's sort of memorize this, I guess, is at the end of the day. You need to come up with an idea to defend the e5 pawn in the Ruy Lopez at this point. It needs to be done with d6. But castling here and just letting this pawn on e5 get taken by white, this is worse. Castles, pawn takes e5, and black is just missing his e pawn. And the best case scenario, black gets his pawn to d6. This white pawn is going to be facing off favorably against this pawn on d6. So castles, pawn takes d5, knight g4, bishop to f4, d6, bishop takes, pawn takes. Yeah, white's just better, and they hold on to this 2.5 pawn advantage for the rest of the game. At this point, plus half a pawn, this is just an initiative for white. But after castles, this is a real problem for white. White's up this is a real problem for black. White's up 2.2 pawns. So yeah, so that shows the theory. I mean, basically, you can't. There are no ideas here that involves giving up the e5 pawn for nothing. You can play knight takes e4 probably. Knight takes e4 looks like it sort of maintains that pawn, but again, with rook e1, this should be a better position for white, where white has better center control. So anyways, mainline move here, d6. Castles leads to a loss of about 1.7 pawns versus optimal play. And yeah, d6 d6 is a better way for black to play. Cool. All right, so the weekly 10-5 tournament just opened. I don't know if I'm actually gonna play it. Maybe I'll play a round, but I think that maybe I'll play one round. I'll probably play the first round. I don't these tournaments I don't really want to be for me. So, but yeah, if anyone wants to play in this chess tournament, this tournament is starting in an hour from now, and there's the link. Yeah, so this is the post-lecture tournament. We're gonna do a lecture tournament after the or we're gonna do a tournament after the lecture in the mornings from now on. Yeah, I think this should be fun. We'll see kind of what happens. If I play, I'll stream it. I'm not sure I'll always be able to play, but I'll probably play the first round today. So we've got this tournament coming up in an hour. The registration just opened if anyone's interested in playing. So yeah, please feel free to join if that's something that you're interested in. And yeah, cool. Anyways, d6 was the improvement, and anything else basically led to a pretty solid disadvantage for black. So d6 was the move here, and really the game was decided by that. Okay, on to the games for this morning. That we were just basically playing catch up since the lesson got canceled last night. Ansh's game is here. Let's take a look. Ansh is playing black, and he's playing against the Queen's Pawn game. Okay, so Ansh plays orthodox e6. Okay, sure. e6 is the second most popular move. Completely fine, and yeah, cool. Thanks for joining the tournament, Sam Sejwani. Yeah, cool. Awesome. So we have 2 players in this tournament so far. I'll probably come back to this a few times. I'm just kind of curious to see how we can get this, how we can do in terms of starting this tournament. I don't know kind of the minimum number of players, but yesterday had a great turnout, about 20 players, and we have this one starting in less than an hour, basically as soon as this lecture ends. So if anyone wants to play, feel free, and the link is right there in the chat. Okay, c4, e6, knight to c3, knight to f6, bishop to g5, pawn takes, e3, c5. Okay, yeah, I guess what I would say is I'm not a huge fan of these early pawn takes c4. You basically, if you're choosing between pawn takes c4 or you're choosing between c6, I would definitely play c6 and keep the semi-Slav position there. Basically the semi-Slav is very solid. It creates this kind of triangle pawn structure. Everything defends everything else. The only real liability that it causes is limited mobility for the bishop on c8, but that often goes away if the white pawn trades on d5. Here you basically have kind of a weakened center. You now basically are allowing e4 to be played. You can play things like c5. You can play things like knight to c6. But there's an issue here where white is playing on e4, and pawn takes c4, e3, c5, bishop takes, pawn takes, and yeah, this overall, I guess I would say that this is really kind of a, this is basically a problem for white. So d4, d5, c4, e6, knight to c3, knight to f6. Bishop to g5. Yeah, so I guess here, so for knight bd7. Yeah, let's take a look at that. I think, yeah, that may be a better way of playing this. That's a main line. I guess I would go with c6 here. But yeah, I think d takes c4 is pretty far down the list in terms of acceptable. Cool, we're up to 5, which is great. Thank you everyone for joining this. And yeah, I think it'll continue to grow. I'll probably play the first round. But yeah, we'll go back to it. We'll go back to it a few times over the course of the rest of this lecture. So yeah, knight to d7 is the main line. Knight to d7. This is the knight defense. This is the modern variation. So bishop e7, modern variation. B knight d7, knight defense. Both very good. Both developing. And I think a lot better than pawn takes c4. Pawn takes c4, just kind of not a move there. So knight defense with knight d7 is what Sam Sejwani is recommending. I think that's probably the way to do this. Get ready for c6. Hey, thank you very much for the follow, Dust. I appreciate it. Thanks for joining the stream. So yeah, so knight to d7 I think is the way to do this as black. An improvement. So d takes c4 I think leads to white being able to play e4. and then bishop to e7 is probably the way to play for black. So yeah, Sam Sejuani's line, we'll just play through it for a few moves. Knight d7, knight f3, c6. This is the structure that I wanted. This is the semi-Slav structure. Knight to d7 paired with this semi-Slav triangle structure. I think this is just better for, this just ends up being better for black. e3, queen a5, knight d2, bishop to b4, queen c2, castles. Black is just generally, black is just generally better here. Or not better, but equal. This is just solid. There's no real problems in black's situation. This is just a better way for black to play this. Facing off on c3, facing off on d2. I think so. Yeah. So I guess I would say Sam Sejuani. The biggest takeaway from this game is something that's pretty simple. It's just an opening error. It's not an error. It's an error in the sense that it creates an inferiority. It doesn't lead to an immediate tactical loss or do anything too dramatic. But I'm just just against in general this simplification on c4. And in this particular opening, so I always am predisposed to like c6 over pawn takes c4. Because pawn takes c4 it neutralizes your center. If you play c6 instead, c6 and bishop to e7 and knight to d7, you have a solid center for black here. Pawn takes c4 and you've kind of neutralized your own center. White can play e4 if he wants, but basically, there's no threat really from black. White's going to have opportunities maybe with d5, but keeping the pawn on d5 is very important to black's continued center control. So bishop to g5, pawn takes, e3, c5. This just isn't ideal. So the line that Sam Sejuani was recommending was knight to d7. I guess I would say I agree with that. Knight to d7, bishop to e7. These are lines that end up being a better way for black to play. But d takes c4 neutralizes the center and leaves the control of e4 much better for white. So yeah, so I would switch this around. Is this the main point? That said, this isn't the worst thing in the world. Black's not badly off here, but it's just a much weaker center for black. Knight to f, and actually, I'm sort of curious. Did white make a misstep here? Because I would figure that. No, okay, all right. So it's about equal. Knight to c6, knight to e5 is an error. Knight to e5 looks like it hangs d4. So knight to d4 looks undefended. Knight takes d4 I think is playable for black, and yeah, cool. All right, awesome, good job, Ansha. Sometimes in the opening, especially if you're dealing with theory, it's much easier to just play something like knight takes d4. But knight takes d4 here, rook to e1. Now black's just better. This is good for black, and ideas like knight to f5. Could be good, but the issue with d takes c4 is that it gave black worse control of the center. But with knight takes d4, now white's center pawn is gone, so control of the center is a lot less clear now. Black still has this pawn on e6. Maybe that has some value, but center control is complicated with d4 pawn. The d4 pawn gone. If the d4 pawn is still there, then knight takes d4. And this is, I guess I would say, better for black. So h6, bishop h4, knight to f5, bishop to g3. Okay, I like this a lot for black. I think black's got a great position, no problems. This is good. Knight takes, pawn takes, a6, queen e2, queen c7. Black's looking great. So yeah, really, that was so pawn takes c4 I think might be worth, that early pawn takes c4 is worth looking at for black. But after knight takes d4, I think black's just really in a good position, and just kind of needs to hold everything together and be tactically accurate, and will have a solid position out of the middle game. Trading off this piece makes complete sense to me. Knight takes g3, I like this. This trades off this bishop, which is now, spent a lot of time but gotten onto a relatively good diagonal. Trades off your outposted knight. Outposted knight could have been helpful maybe, but I still think it's a good trade. If you can separate white from his bishop pair, that's a good idea. Bishop d6, bishop takes, queen takes, rook takes, and now black's really winning. So yeah, I think this is good. I definitely like the way that black is playing. Here you have a really interesting kind of thematic thing. So this position sort of looks like a Sicilian at this point. This basically, so this Sicilian position, right? it came out of the queen's pawn game, but basically with the missing c pawn, the missing d pawn, I'm looking at this more of a Sicilian. I think the development of this light squared bishop is extremely important. This really actually matters. So, black is sort of lacking in development here. Black is up a pawn, so that's great, and has a better pawn structure, so that's great. So I think black's position overall is very good. But I think that this development of this rook on the a file into the c8 square, this is the type of thing that really needs to get dealt with. So bishop to d7, rook to c8, bishop to c6 is a good way to do this. But you have an opportunity to cleanly develop bishop to d7 here. And if you play bishop to d7, I don't really see how white can catch up. I mean, you can basically play bishop to c6 and control the long diagonal. You have great control over the light squares of the center. And you can challenge black, or you can challenge white's control of the d file with moves like a rook to d8, f rook to d8, and start trading off there. If you can trade off everything, this leads to a winning king and pawn endgame. So yeah, black is in a good situation to win this. So I think that knight g4 is a fundamental error. I don't know if there's really an immediate tactical response to this. Rook to c5 seems to cause some problems. Rook to c5 and b6. Yeah, so this was not a good continuation. So I think the focus, the takeaway focus here on this, Anch, is I think you play bishop to d7. I think you play bishop to c6. You can get your rooks to the a rook to c8 file, a rook to d8 file, and then with these rooks on these open files, you're really fine. White can't get into your territory. But the issue was you can see kind of with this move of knight to g4. This is basically like an over move of the knight. This rook moves to better places and then really gets into black territory. This is really what you didn't want to have happen, to be completely honest, as white, as black. So this is the second takeaway from this game. So the first takeaway: delay pawn takes c4 in the opening. Develop your pieces first. Consider playing c6. F7, e6, d5. c6, b7 structure. That semi-Slav structure for black is very solid and difficult for white to make much headway against. So I like that structure. I revolve around that structure. But even if you don't play into that structure, you still probably want to get your pieces developed before you should be in a rush to play pawn takes c4. Pawn takes c4 takes the pawn off of d5, and that pawn on d5 gives you a lot of center control as black. You sort of need it. So knight to g4, bishop, rook to c5, b6. I think this is probably not the strongest idea. So knight to b4, or knight to g4. I think bishop d7, bishop c6, a rook to c8, a rook to d8. That was a better way for black to play this. So yeah, rook to b8, knight takes b6, and yeah, this overall leads to equality. So yeah, this was a kind of a big misstep. I think I'm not sure if you can head off the rook going to c7 completely, but bishop to d6, bishop to c6 definitely makes a good effort at it. So bishop to d7 immediately here, and like a4 maybe, bishop to c6. Yeah, this is solid for black. Black can do things like play f rook to d8, a rook to d8, and play on like knight to d5. But yeah, this paired with f rook to d8, a rook to d8, and threats on knight to d5. So, anyways, interesting, and I think that black should be about equal here. Okay, rook takes, sure. But yeah, so black maximized tactically out of this endgame. Nice. Great win, Anch. I think this all went well. I think white made a blunder with I guess f5 leaves you with a backwards pawn on e6 that's kind of difficult. This e6 pawn could become a point of attack, but I'm looking for the really decisive move here. So rook takes d5 was an error. Rook takes d5. So yeah, I think black has played this correctly. Placing threats on the g2 and g3 pawns as this rook is extended like this is the right idea. And then yeah, basically after rook takes g3, you have equalized on the passed pawns. So yeah, you can start playing moves like basically as soon as rook takes g3, you can start playing h4, h3, h2, h1. So yeah, that was a big error for white. White needs to be more proactive in defending these g pawns. White basically just abandoned the defense of these g pawns, and you were able to get a solid position out of that. So yeah, that was big. Okay, cool. Interesting. All right, interesting situation for black there. Yeah. Cool. So the takeaways from this game, I thought your rook and pawn endgame was just fine. I don't think there was many problems there. I think coming up with that early threat on g2, g3, and then getting the pass pawn on the h file, I thought that was a good plan. So just going from the beginning of the game to the end of the game, I think that this d takes c4 pawn or d takes c4 move was too early. I think you needed to play. I think basically, if you look at the opening book, the main lines here are bishop b7, knight to d7. I lean towards c6, c6, and you just have this solid semi-Slav structure. But when you play pawn takes c4, you're not really, winning a pawn, and you're taking your centralized d5 pawn away from the defense of e4. So for that reason, I would be delaying pawn takes c4. I would instead play. Just hold everything there. The opening book says get developed with bishop to e7, knight d7. Third choice is c6, but one of those three I think is better than pawn takes c4 here. Okay, so after that, everything's basically equal. Nothing too terrible happens. White hangs this pawn on d4. So black, but I really like black's position here. I think black is, black wants to trade off pieces probably. But the main thing that black is sort of, has a disadvantage on is development. This a8 rook is immobile and undeveloped, and this bishop on c8 is immobile and undeveloped. So development is extremely important for black in this situation. So that's something that you need to kind of pay attention to. Here, where basically there's no, really active threats, this is the opportunity for you to play bishop to d6, or bishop to d7, sorry. Bishop to d7, bishop to c6, and you're fully developed. This is strong. But knight to g4 and this rook, I don't know exactly. Basically this lets the rook into the position. So I don't think you want to do that. Bishop to d7 was the improvement here with ideas like bishop to c6, rook to c8, rook to d8 in mind. You're winning here. You're up a pawn. You have a better pawn structure, and what you need to do is get your pieces developed. Match white in development and match white in terms of rook mobility on the king side. So yeah, cool. We're up to 10 players on the chess tournament. If anyone wants to join this tournament, I'm sending out the link again. The link to the tournament is here. And if anyone wants to join, we're up to 11 players, which is great. Good turnout. I'll probably play the first game. One other thing I wanted to talk about is we have a series. So like basically my idea was we should cool, yeah. Okay, so the main thing that I would say in terms of improving dusting is make sure to basically make sure to do your tactical study. So the tactical study is the most important dust. I think what you need to do in order to improve as quickly as possible is go on to like chess.com Puzzle Rush, chess.com Puzzle Battle, and yeah, you really, I would say do it for an hour or two a day for like a month, and I think it'll really help you. Like, we can show you what it looks like, but basically, this kind of Puzzle Rush. Puzzle Rush is a great program if you can do this for a lot of time. So this Puzzle Rush here, is a program on chess.com, but just basically get very used to doing these positions and doing these positions quickly. You can basically get into the situation where, you're always very comfortable with these positions. You want to get it so that your pattern recognition is really, really fast. and also and also in the longer puzzles, once they start getting more difficult, you can put your real calculating ability. You can really work on your calculating ability. But the truth of the matter is, a majority of games under 2000 are decided by tactical errors, like things that you would see in these types of puzzles. So you basically want to get to the point with these puzzles where you understand all the positions. And hey, thank you very much for the follow us, sir. Appreciate you joining the stream. But basically, these recognizing these tactical positions and understanding how to advance these. This idea is really I guess the best way to improve. You can if you do this for an hour or two a day for a month, you're really going to be much stronger at doing this, and then you'll be able to apply what you've learned from doing these puzzles to to the games that you play. That's what I'm saying. I think that this is this provides an ability to quickly improve. So that's what I'd recommend. I think you can play these puzzle puzzle rushes. I'm not sure if you can do them unlimited for free, but you can definitely do a good number for free. And puzzle survival, which is another very similar thing. I'm pretty sure you can do unlimited for free on chess.com. So yeah, you want to be able to do this as quickly as possible. You really want to be able to understand these. But I think that they come up a lot, and I think that will end up being a good way for you to improve. Let's see. Yeah, sure. No, please send the game. I don't know if you're on the Discord yet. If you're on the Discord yet, Dust. But here's a link to the Discord. Just send it on the Discord to the game submission section. We'll get to it. We're a little bit backlogged. I may try to think of a new way to do this. But yeah, we have we have a good Discord. We have a game submission section. Your game will definitely be on the stream, and I'm very happy to look over your game. A lot of masters charge for for game reviews, and really my goal here is to make sure that one doesn't have to do that. So yeah, feel free. Please send your game, and it will be on the stream before too long. So yeah, please send it. Thanks for volunteering the game, and it's always helpful to have more material to show on the stream. Anyways, yeah. I would say put it on the Discord game submission section. I think that's the way to do it, Dust, and if you do it on there, that's the most helpful. Just so I can keep it all together. Yeah, thank you, Dust. But we'll get to it pretty quickly. I'll confirm the date and time as soon as I can. I've got a few that I need to confirm the date and time on. I'll get to that today. But yeah, feel free to send it. Cool. And also, one other thing that I wanted to say is that we're gonna have a leaderboard for the we have a leaderboard for these post lecture tournaments. I'm sorry. I'm just dealing with the Discord. But yeah, so anyways, I think that's really overall just good stuff, and yeah, this tournament will count for the leaderboard. The leaderboard, basically it'll be like a monthly thing. And the winners for the previous month, starting on tournaments on July 9th, or starting on June 9th, counting from June 9th until the end of the month, we're going to keep track of whoever wins all those tournaments, and the winner of those tournaments is going to get recognition on the server. So I wanted to make sure there was a good reason to play these tournaments, and yeah, we're up to 12 players today. You get leaderboard points just for participating, but you get more leaderboard points for winning. So yeah, we have a total of 13 players today for the post lecture tournament, and anyone playing in this tournament will get points for the leaderboard. And then the first three will also get will get extra points. But the winners on the leaderboard will get recognition on the server and probably some type of server designation. So yeah, definitely I think it will be cool to play in these tournaments, and we'll do one after the lecture every day from now on. The chess.com club is growing. It's got about 300 people now, or 350 people, I think. Yeah, cool. All right. So on to the next one. Cool. This is another game from TK. Okay, and TK is playing white here. He plays against the French. He plays bishop to d3 against the French. Okay, so I've seen TK play this a number of times. I think that it's probably not the right way to. Cool, yeah. Thanks, Dust. I appreciate it. I will let you know as soon as as soon as basically we get to it. I'll give you a date and time for it today. But yeah, thank you very much for sending it, Dust. It's very helpful to have people send games, and we are a little bit backlogged, but we will get up to that soon. So thanks, Dust. Thanks for sending it. And yeah, bishop to d3, bishop to d3, c5. Overall here, I think that this ends up being better for, basically better for white, or sorry, better for black than your normal main line. Main line here is knight to c3, bishop to d3. Basically this Schlechter variation. Okay, after d takes c4, which is the best move for black. Black is better here. So bishop takes e4, black is better or equals. So I think that this is not the most promising line for white in the French. We've gone over it a few times. I think this basically is this is a line. This has been looked at various points. But I think after pawn takes here, knight to f6 can be played comfortably, and then this bishop has to move, and then black gets ahead in development. c5 challenging the center is probably best here. But yeah, after c5, yeah, no, of course, no. Thank you very much for sending the game, and yeah, no, I really appreciate it. It's always very helpful. I'm really, the goal of this is something that I think we can just really do very easily, which is make chess lessons at a master level or below free. Chess lessons can be free. There's many places where people are paying money for chess lessons that they don't have to pay. They very easily could just watch a free stream online, and it's often students that are paying for it. So I think with students paying money for students are basically paying money for things that they shouldn't be paying for. So my goal here is basically to try to make opportunities a little better for people who don't have money for chess lessons, and yeah, I hope this is helpful. That's that's the goal. Is really my hope is that this will encourage other people to start giving free lessons as well, and that this channel will be successful and that lots of people will watch it. But lots of people pay a lot of money for chess lessons, and I don't think they need to do any of that. So yeah, that's why this channel exists. That's why I'm here, and free lessons for everyone. And I think that'll help people, regardless of where people are from or what they what their financial background is. They'll have lessons from at least a halfway reputable source on how to play. So that's the goal. So please please feel free to tell your friends, get more people interested in this, and yeah, we're working on the project. Chess lessons should be free at a high level worldwide. It's very easy to do. This is not even the only thing. This is not the only thing that I do, and I plan to make no money off of this. But I think that it would be really good for the world if chess lessons were free for everyone. Everyone who wants one can get a chess lesson. I think we have the technology now to make that happen. So yeah, I want this channel to succeed. I want other people, other people to give, good lessons online. And yeah, I think we'll make this. I think we'll make this free. Chess lessons. The price of a chess lesson can easily be 0, and the world will be better if it's 0. So let's make it 0. Anyways. Okay. So yeah. So bishop takes d4. Schlechter variation. I'm not really sold on. I think bishop takes e4, bishop takes e4, and then basically black has a lot of good ways to kind of deal with the center. C5 is not as good as the immediate pawn takes C4 here. It may transpose to be the same, but I think that this overall ends up in worse situations a good percentage of the time. So C5, E takes D5, that's the main line. E takes D5, played in a majority of games. E takes D5, E takes D5, D takes C5, bishop takes C5, and this leaves black with an isolated queen's pawn. White's a little bit better, but not much. No, feel free. Feel free to enter the tournament. Here, let me just pull this up again. But yeah, this is just our club tournament. We're gonna do a club tournament after the lecture every day. And here's the link to it. Here's the link to the club tournament, and so far it looks like we've got 14 players. If you play the tournament, you'll get points for the leaderboard, and then the top 3 at the end of the month on the leaderboard will get recognition on the server. So yeah, there's the tournament entry link, and feel free to join. 14 players so far. I think this should be a good one, and anyone there. I guess I wouldn't say focus on slow versus long time controls. I think the biggest focus for you, sir, is basically just go with this. Basically just go with tactics. At the highest level, chess is a slow game. So rapid and longer games are the most popular at the highest level. So yeah, I guess what I would say, about the thanks, Sam Sejwani. The main thing about improving at the level that you're at is just tactics. So I showed that puzzle rush. I think that's a great way to improve. Puzzle battle is another one on chess.com. I think that's a great way to improve. And basically just just play as much as you can on the is basically just improve your tactics to the point where you get to be a really strong tactical player. That's my advice. I think that's the quickest way to improve out of class level. Like under 2000, a majority of games are decided by like 1 and 2 move tactics. Really tactics so that you can get your pattern. Basically pattern recognition that you can use to solve those tactics. And yeah, that's good. I think that ends up being the best way to improve at the level that you're at, sir. To be more specific, I think the games that you should be focused on are the ones that are the most fun for you. I think that if your goal is to make your chess skill better so that you improve in all of your different time controls. With that in mind, play the one that's the most fun for you. But in terms of training, the quickest way to improve is going to be by strengthening your tactical skills. That's what I'm saying. Is your best option, sir? And I think if you do that, I think that will really help. Yeah, TK's saying variation helps. Yeah, I agree. I think good variation is helpful there, and I think that will be helpful in moving your game forward. But tactics are puzzles. So I would say 1 to 2 hours a day for a month, and your tactical situation is going to be much stronger, sir. I think that's going to be a good way to do it. You can do it on chess.com. I showed the puzzle rush a minute ago. Or puzzle battle is also good on chess.com. There's also like puzzle racer, puzzle storm on lead chess. There's chess tempo, and then there's CT-ART, which is the one that I actually used as a tactics trainer to get from about 1200 to about 2000. All right. So now we're looking at TK's game, I think this Schlechter variation runs into problems with pawn takes c4, but since you play it, CT-ART is a chess program. It's a pretty good one. You can just Google it, I think that is good. So pawn takes d5, pawn takes d5, pawn takes b5, and you're about equal. White has, I guess I would say white has about equal development. White can develop naturally with knight to f3, bishop to f4. Castles, knight to c3, and black's got this isolated queen's pawn. So overall, I guess I would say that that in this situation, this situation is good for white, yeah, you're going to have the ability to develop comfortably and safely in this situation, and end up in a place where you will have a lot of play. But I think that this is kind of your best case scenario out of the selector variation. The selector variation with bishop takes c4, bishop takes e4, knight to f6. This I think is equal or better for black. So that's sort of what I would be worried about if playing this variation. You can still play the variation. I'm just saying that this line is generally pretty. This line can run into some problems. Okay, but what actually happened in the game was fine for white. Quick development. And yeah, bishop to b3 I think was the move where I think bishop to b3 is a misstep. This bishop belongs on this diagonal. Bishop to g4 facing d8. With bishop to b3, you lose a lot of mobility for your knight. So your knight can be played to c3. Your knight can be played to d2. But yeah, playing your knight to b2, I don't think that's particularly helpful. This knight ends up with relatively poor mobility. This knight on d2, and yeah, I think that is a thematic error. This is about equal. I don't know, nothing too exciting there. And the players agreed on a draw in this situation. Okay, whatever. But I guess I would say that this. So there's two things that I would fix here. Two things that I would change. Develop the pieces first. The real error here, the biggest error that I think is. So we have 17 players here so far, which is great. We have waiting for a few more. But pawn takes c5, bishop takes c5, knight to f3, knight to f6, castles, bishop b3. This b3 is an error. Yes, so you should develop the pieces now. I don't think you should immediately jump into attacking on d5. I think you can do things like play bishop to g5. I think you can play knight to c3. I think you can play knight to d2 and then knight to b3. But yeah, we were looking at a similar game the other day. I think that the knight to d2 can be played, knight to b3 can be played, knight to d4. But overall, this b3 doesn't really help. This putting the bishop on this long diagonal isn't super helpful. The bishop should instead go to g4, threatening on d8, and yeah. But I think that this idea in general is causing some problems. I think that knight to d2, knight to b3, c3. That's kind of a normal that's kind of a normal way to play this. Knight to d2, knight to b3. I think that's a stronger way for white to play. Bishop to g5 as well. Bishop to g5 facing onto d8. That's good. And yeah, so I think that developing the pieces was important, but I think that this idea was a little bit, kind of not so great from the start. b3, bishop to b2, not a great idea. Instead, bishop to g5, pushing on d8. So yeah, so I think that that's your improvement. So, this is a pretty short game. There wasn't really that much of an opportunity. This bishop's mobility got really bad after d4, but I think the idea was where to steer away from this. Anyways, in terms of improving this game, I think the Schlechter line is pretty, it runs into problems with pawn takes e4, bishop takes e4. I think that line is just not playable kind of in the modern idea. The knight to c3 French is very good, playable. Tarrasch French is also good, playable. So it's up to you what you want to do, but yeah, I think the bishop to d3 is a little bit questionable after pawn takes e4. Okay, so in terms of advancing this position, I think that b3 is an error. I think bishop to g5 is better. Bishop to g5 facing onto d8 seems like a better play. And yeah, black had the ability to play d4 a lot in this game, but it was particularly a problem after bishop to b2 can be played. So yeah, I think in this situation, white's fine, and yeah. I think white's just good. No real issues. White is fine. Continuing forward. Yeah, interesting game, TK. Thank you very much for sending it. Those are the two things that I would revise. I think that the opening is flawed. I think you really, I think that it's not refuted, but it's definitely, equalized or better for black after this situation. Knight to f6. I mean, black's got an eval edge and feels accurate eval edge. Black's going to get a... Yeah, so I think instead, basically, I think that your ideas can involve knight to c3, knight to d2. Those are the main lines. I think that those, if we're looking at the French, knight to c3 and knight to d2 are a great majority of lines at this point. Exchange French even isn't that terrible, but I think that knight to c3 and knight to d2 are a better, stronger idea. So yeah, cool. We're up to 17 players on this tournament. I'm just gonna say, uh, so I'm gonna play the first round of this tournament. That should be fun, and we'll take a look. Okay, cool. Yeah, so anyways, TK, thank you very much for sending the game. The two places that I would look at, I think I would switch to a mainline French. This selector variation now, in terms of percentage of the time that it's played, it's less than 1%. I think it's just objectively not very good. I think instead, knight to, basically knight to c3 could be fine. But yeah, this is not the way to play that French. Okay. Bishop to b2 is not correct. I think instead bishop to g5, rook to e1, knight to d2, and that should be better for white. All right, cool. Thank you for sending the game, TK. Appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, I was going to take a look at the next one. The next one is here. This is Sam Serjwani's game. Cool. Thank you for sending it, Sam Serjwani. All right. Sam Serjwani is playing black here. E4, E5, knight F3, knight C6, bishop to C4, knight to F6. Okay, so this is interesting. I guess what I would say here is, knight to F6 is the second most common line. The Italian game, I've always been a bishop to C5 player, but knight to F6 is playable too. The things that happen with knight to C6 involve quicker C3, D4 combinations. I would say knight to C3, and basically, C3 becomes very playable. D3, bishop to G5 is also played frequently here, and so you can. I think Dusting is looking at the idea of the way of basically. I think you can split games like that. That's an old magic trick. Is like you play one game against the other side, and you win on half the boards. I think that's a thing. But yeah, cool. So let's see. We're up to 19 players here, so this is great. This is a big tournament, good turnout. Thanks everyone for being on this tournament. And yeah, if there's more people, I'll put the official Discord on here too. Okay, cool. So yeah, awesome. So now we're moving on to Sam Serjwani's game. So Sam Serjwani's game is out of the Italian game. The Italian game is is interesting. Basically, it involves usually pretty stable, efficient attacking for white. It's very solid. Not much in terms of strong refutations for it. Just very strong play, strong and solid. I think that's a good way to play it, in general, and then be stronger kind of on the fundamentals and play. Yeah, let me just see. Yeah, so bishop to c5 is what I play. Yeah, all of those openings are interesting, Sam Serjwani. I think that the Hungarian defense, yeah, bishop to c5, knight to c6, Hungarian defense, they're all playable. But yeah, I just generally like it as a good system for white and for black. I play into it as white and black. As black, I play bishop to c5, but overall, I think that this opening just is extremely solid. It's just hard for basically sides to outplay each other without really having better fundamental understandings of the game. So that's why I like it. Ideas for white. Okay, so white castles here. Ideas for white can include c3 and d4. An early d3 can allow bishop to g5 to be played relatively early. But white castles here, castles, c3, d6, d4. Yeah, this is a very, very common kind of general play. In terms of play, basically, e takes d5, c takes d4, bishop to b6. I think white's going to have slight edge here. So this d6, after d4, you can play bishop to b6, and then this overall trading, list of trades ends up being good for black. So pawn takes e5, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, pawn takes e5, and then if queen takes d8, rook takes d8, and the rook ends up on this open file, and black has more than equalized. Yeah, that's what I was talking about, TK. Yeah, I know that that classic magic trick. I think they did that on TV somewhere. But yeah, you can basically halfway play people. It's kind of interesting. I don't know. In my opinion, that's a magic trick. It's not super helpful to improve, but yeah, it is a magic trick that I've seen done before. Anyways, we'll see. So knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop to c4, knight f6. All of this is good. I think white's maybe up slightly, but okay, whatever. d4, and then with bishop to b6, the e4 pawn is hanging, and with all these available trades, this is going to end up being good for black. Now white needs to defend the e4 pawn, but this line overall, playing bishop to b6 immediately, was good. I think in general this is always. I think this may always be true. Basically, yeah. So yeah. Basically, this d4 playing off against c5. I think this is a better for Yeah. No, that's true. That's true, Dust. There are a lot of openings. One of the things that I'm thinking of is, one of the things that that's been really helpful for me in terms of doing this stream is I've gotten to learn the names of them. Fundamentally, I guess I would say I knew a good percentage of them, and I knew kind of what was good and bad in each of them. But memorizing the actual specific, memorizing the actual specific lines there is. Yeah, I guess there's the elephant. Let's think of the different openings. There's definitely the elephant gambit. There's the there's the birds opening, but I think that was named after a person. But there's definitely some openings named after animals too. Elephant gambit, hippopotamus, right? Yeah, there's a bunch of different openings to think about. So. Anyways, yeah, a lot of good opening play, and yeah, you guys know him better. Anyways, bishop to b6 I think is the best play for black here. Bishop to b6, sure, and yeah, okay, cool. So bishop to b6 is better than taking on d4. I think in general this tends to be true. I think, basically if white's going to end up in a situation where white can basically comfortably retake with d4 and then black can't challenge it, it's better to just avoid it. I think it's better for black to basically, on d4 just go to bishop to b6 and then, yeah. So basically play bishop to b6 as opposed to pawn takes d4. If you allow this structure is not super helpful for, this structure is not super helpful for black. So what you want to do instead is you want to play bishop to b6 when this type of thing happens. If d4, pawn takes d4, pawn takes d4, bishop to b6, that situation is worse than just playing bishop to b6 immediately. Here you still have that pawn that's hanging on e4. The pawn could take on d5, pawn could take on e5, pawn could take on e5. Queen could take on d8, rook could take on d8, but overall that trade ends up better for black than trading everything off in the center. So I think that as a general policy, that's kind of a good piece of information to know. Cool. Wow, we're on to 21 players. Yeah, look, this is a good turnout. 21 players. Awesome. This game counts for the tournament leaderboard for the month. Just so we know, basically, all of this play basically is going to be counted up at the end of the month. We have a scoring system. Everyone who plays in these tournaments gets a few points, and then the people who win the tournament get the most points. And then the people who basically the people with the most points at the end of the month get recognition on the server. So that's what I was doing there. I think that ends up being a cool idea, and yeah, happy to see these tournaments drawing so well. We're up to 21 people, which is great, yeah, thank you all very much for joining. I think these will only get bigger, hopefully, and we'll keep inviting people in. Yeah, so that, and basically we'll do one of those every day after the morning lecture. Cool. So e takes d4, e takes d4. This line was worse than playing bishop to b6 to start. Knight to e5, and white's got a slight positional advantage. Bishop to g4, bishop to e2, queen to d7, h3, bishop takes, queen takes, and white's up about 0.4. Cool. So c6, queen d1. Queen d1 is an error. Basically, this d5 pawn is going to become a liability for white. If you're allowed to trade here, you can play like c takes d5, c takes d5, and then you can start like lining up. You can basically on the next move line up your rook, like rook to d8, if you want. You can also play bishop to d4. The engine plays a very engine-like bishop to d4, blocking the defense on d5. Kind of an interesting way to play this tactically. But you can also win the pawn by playing rook to d8, and then white can't get any more defenders on it. You'll win it on the next move. Bishop to g5, I guess, pins. So yeah, maybe bishop to d5 avoids that problem with the pinning of the rook on d8. But bishop to d4 and knight takes d5 playing. But yeah, so this bishop to d4, this is a better way to play. Okay, so let's go through this game again. The improvements for black. This is the first one. So if white's going to end up in a situation where he gets pawn takes d5, bishop to b5, you're better off just leaving the pawn on e5. You basically, if you trade, you're basically trading this e5 pawn for this c3 pawn. And this e5 pawn is much further advanced and with much better center control. So trading off this e5 pawn for this c3 pawn is not a good trade for black. So that's really the reason to keep it on the board. Better for black is to just move bishop to b6 immediately, and I think that this is usually true in the Italian and Ruy Lopez in which d4 is played. I think it's just better to play bishop to b6 than it is to play than to trade off, because here you're trading off one of your important center pawns. Just hold this there, and your bishop's ending up on b6 anyways. So leaving the pawn on e5 and avoiding this trade of the e5 pawn for the c3 pawn, that's better for black. Pawn takes, knight takes, knight takes, pawn takes, rook takes. Overall here, black is fine, and yeah, overall I think that this is good for this is good line for black. But that's not what happened. So instead, pawn takes d4, and the situation's about equals. Queen d7, h3, bishop takes, queen takes. Overall here, white's a little bit better. I don't think there's any problems, and yeah. So, anyways, this I think is yeah, I think this ends up being an interesting situation. White's equal. Black's ideas are probably going to be to undermine this d5. I think that's the best plan for black, is to play something like c6, then pawn takes d5, then pawn takes d5, then knight takes d5. I think that's the best way to do it. Queen d1, pawn takes, and then the engine finds bishop to d4, which is really a good idea. But basically, bishop to d4 breaks off the defense. Hey, good morning, Pravilo. Good morning, Raymond. Thank you guys for being here. The chess tournament starts in looks like 7 minutes. So yeah, if anyone wants to get in, I'm gonna stream the first round and then basically start work after that. But yeah, this should be an interesting tournament, and it'll count for the leaderboard. So everybody who wants to continue to play, it's game in 10 plus 5 second Oh wait, sorry, yeah, it's game in 10. So yeah, it's game in 10. Sorry, it's a game in 10 tournament. Thank you very much for that. But yeah, game in 10. The label's wrong. Sorry about that. We're still trying to work things out, but yeah, it's game in 10. Thanks for catching that, Raymond. Cool. So yeah, this is interesting. Bishop to d4 instead. Basically threat on knight to d4. Rook a d8, bishop to g5, queen d6, and yeah, I think instead, I think knight to e4 is an error. Knight to e4 just allows black to trade 2 rooks for minor pieces. Bishop takes f2, king f1, bishop takes, king there, rook takes. And yeah, I think basically here black's better. So, yeah. Yeah, black is basically up a piece here. Yeah, I think here basically black's good. So, anyways. Queen e7, bishop takes, queen takes, c6. And with this attack on d5, I think black's fine. Knight to e4 was basically the game-deciding error here. And yeah, black wins a piece. So okay, so let's look at the going basically front to back on this tournament, or on this game. This was an error for black. Pawn takes d4 trades the pawn on e5 for the pawn on c3. Bishop b6. The bishop's going to end up on b6 immediately. So I think the improvement here is to just immediately play bishop to b6. This leads to black being slightly better. There's no real threats in the center because pawn takes and the pawn's defended well enough. So I think that this d4 and then bishop to b6 idea, I think this ends up being so that ends up being better than pawn takes d4, pawn takes d4. Much better, bishop to b6. Okay, so consider that pawn takes d4, pawn takes d4, bishop to b6, yeah, I guess I would say white is solid. So or white is solid here, basically equals. c6 is the right plan facing off against this. And then there was this small improvement that the engine finds, but basically bishop to d4. With rook to d8, bishop to g5 can get played. You're playing for the right thing, which is to take this overextended pawn, but you can actually basically attack it in a way that white can't easily defend against with bishop to d4. Then if queen to f3, you can play bishop takes f3 and then queen takes d5 if you want, or queen to b3. But something awkward needs to be played by black in order to maintain the defense on bishop to d4. Just slightly better than rook to d8. And then knight to e4, and then I think the game's pretty much decided. I think it's basically over after that knight to d4 and then the hanging f2 move. So yeah, I think, and rook to f1 was another blunder. So you basically played a good game against two major blunders from white. The main takeaway here is in terms of playing the Italian game, in terms of playing the Ruy Lopez, playing bishop to b6 immediately against d4 and pawn takes d4. If you play bishop to b6 here, you're better as black. So pawn takes, bishop to g4, and black is fine. Black gets this good attack on d5. Then white makes tactical errors that makes black's life even easier. Interesting game. All right. So d4 I guess was a little bit premature. You could just play bishop to b6 instead. We're up to 24 players with 3 minutes left to join. Thank you all very much for joining this tournament. This is 10-minute game. Cool. All right, so we basically have 3 minutes to go, and 24 players starting out. This is a great turnout. We're doing these as every day. We're doing these after the stream, we'll basically just go from the stream into this. I'll do one. They're just made by automatic pairing. They're just basically this is so it's a Swiss system. So basically it's done by rating, I'm just gonna send out the link to the Discord and to the stream, so hopefully this will be good in terms of bringing people into the Discord, getting more people into this monthly series. I think this will be cool. The monthly series, we have the leaderboard, this should be cool. This is an old arena in the leaderboard section I'm just looking at, but yeah, this is great, cool. So we're up to 25 players. That's great. Awesome. Okay, cool. Awesome. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, makes sense to me, Sam Sejwani. But yeah, this tournament's getting live streamed. It's starting in 30 seconds. And yeah, thank you all very much for playing. Thank you all very much for being here. Um, uh, good luck, everyone. Thanks for joining. And I'm just gonna play the first game. I don't really want to win these tournaments. I think it's more fun if everyone from the club just sort of plays. But this is cool. We have basically our own club. The club is growing, and yeah, feel free to invite your friends. Feel free to tell them about it. Yeah, awesome. All right, game against Bishop Hurricane. All right, let's see. I'm gonna play E5 today. I could play Sicilian, but I'm gonna play E5 Vienna game. Okay, interesting. Um, all right. But yeah, cool. So this is great. All the games started off. We have 25 players, 24 players. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Interesting. Why is there... I'm sort of curious about why there's only... so there's 24 players and there's 10 games? Interesting. I would have figured that there would be 12 games. I wonder what's going on with this. I think that's probably too difficult, Kiro. I think that, yeah, I don't think that's particularly likely, but yeah, it should be interesting, and you can definitely try, Kiro. All right, F4. Okay, so this is the Vienna Gambit. The Vienna Gambit. Okay, so I think what you do against the Vienna Gambit, I think we've looked at this a few times. Yeah, here, I was thinking D5, right? I mean, maybe, but again, not too, not too... I'm not sure it's ever been done before, Kira. It would surprise me. I don't think there's many people who have reached IM without like less than 5 years of playing. Yeah, that seems pretty ambitious, to be honest. I mean, always good to set high expectations, but we'll see. This game was, yeah, I don't know. I think I misplayed this. See, I'm not very good with these openings, to be completely honest. We've actually covered this before. I don't know. I'd be curious, Kiro. I haven't seen it, to be honest. Let me know if you find one where we know that for sure. But I would be surprised. I'm not sure. I don't think I've seen it. Under 5? I don't think so. With these types of things, I'm always curious. I mean, if you can find one, Kira, let me know. But I'm always interested in learning new things. But cool, a lot of some quick games here. 1-0 for a lot of people. We're up to 24 players. Cool. This is good. This is actually the Vienna Gambit is probably some opening theory that I should learn a little bit better. Good game, Bishop Hurricane. Thank you very much for joining the stream. Uh, um, let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at this game. I have to go, but I sort of want to look at. Sorry, Arthur. Well, let's uh, Okay. But I wanted to just look before we close out the stream. I wanted to just kind of look at. I think I misplayed this opening. I think Bishop Hurricane played it fine. I think I made an error. But yeah, let's take a look at the opening here, just since we have a minute. It's the Vienna Gambit, but I'm pretty sure I did it wrong. I just wanted to make sure. Okay, so in the Vienna Gambit we have this no, thanks for the game, Bishop Hurricane. But I think that I think that basically you played correctly and I played incorrectly on this. E takes f4 is the move for black. I think anything else other than E takes f4 is bad for black here. So here, in this Vienna Gambit, E takes f4 and bishop to c5 are really the only two moves that are playable, it looks like. E takes f4 leads to a black eval advantage of 0.75, and bishop to c5 leads to a black eval advantage of 0.05. And I played knight to f6. So look, I made a big mistake in this game. I thought that knight f6... I don't know what I was thinking, to be completely honest. But this gives you the Halloween Gambit type position, just so we know for the future Bishop Hurricane, because I messed up on this opening. I don't know what I was thinking. But yeah, this gives you a good position, Bishop Hurricane. If I ever play knight f6 against this again, you can play pawn takes e4, knight takes e5, or pawn takes e5, knight takes e5, d4, and white gets a huge position. Basically this is the situation in the Halloween Gambit, and in the Halloween Gambit, yeah, no. So I'm hoping it's helpful, Bishop Hurricane. It's helpful for me because I made a big error, right? Look, I mean, I made an error worth 1.75 points here. So yeah, I don't know, big blunder by me actually. Again. But knight went to f6. Knight's not supposed to go to f6. You're supposed to play pawn takes f4 here. Bishop to c5 may also be slightly playable. But yeah, knight to f6 is clearly incorrect for black. So I don't know what I was doing. I played so knight to f6 and then white's up by a point and a half. And then like f takes e5, knight takes e5. I mean, I guess knight takes e5, d4, and white is clearly better. So white's got a 2-point eval advantage. So if nothing else, that game was helpful for learning that for the future, I think. Yeah. So I didn't really know what to do there or how to. But now I do, right? So it's good. I hope this is good in terms of one of the things that I'm disappointed because I don't know if you guys knew this, but Twitch crashed last night. Like the whole website crashed. So I couldn't do my stream last night because Twitch was broken, which was kind of interesting. It's basically you play the next round. So it's there's 23 players right now, and we're gonna have a total of 4 rounds. Just wait for your next round wait for your next round tournament. But yeah, the whole Twitch crashed. Which was kind of funny. It's kind of amazing that the Twitch can crash, but what I wanted to cover last night was basically how to analyze your own games. This isn't really. Hey, good morning, Lauren. Thanks very much for joining the stream. So this basically this isn't the same as the lesson that I had planned. The lesson that I had planned was how to improve your own games, or how to analyze your own games. But I think that this is helpful. Honestly, this is the game that we just played. This is a great example. I played a move that leads to an eval advantage of oh, that's really cool, Lauren. Just so you know, I think thank you for being here, Lauren. But what I was wondering about this is, I appreciate it. Thank you, Lauren. But what I was kind of curious about this was this knight to f6. This move is pretty funny because I know that Lauren is very interested in kind of like opening theory, and this is a huge issue with the opening theory that I just played. So I was playing black here, and I played knight to f6, so giving my opponent an advantage of 1.5 on move 1. Basically knight to f6 advantage of my. So basically, so I did, right? So this is a big error for black. So we both know from now on. I mean, it's good. It's the idea of last night's lecture was having the basically having an advantage of that's right. Well, now I know it better, right? Or at least I guess I knew it, but I forgot it. But yeah, that was a bad move by black. So the correct move by black is e takes f4 or bishop to c5. But now, in terms of looking at my own game analysis, we got to see this, and this one was pretty obvious. You basically can look at the game that you just played, see like this type of swing in the eval, and then knight to f6, d3, d5. But basically, black is white is better here after that thing that turns it into the Halloween Gambit type pawn structure. So knight to f6, big error, pawn takes, knight takes, d4, and then something like knight to g6. I think that Lauren puts a pretty good summary on that. I think I knew that, but I forgot. So this is, but I think this is helpful in just understanding kind of how to look at it. It's not real. There's no real. There doesn't need to be any kind of big deal about it. Like you can just sort of go with the standard, just going through the engine line, and look for big big changes in the eval from move to move. Anyways, I guess I would say that was the thing. This d4 was the way for white to refute the move that I played. But I know now that that I don't want to play that. I want to play, I don't want to play knight to f6. I want to play bishop to c5 or pawn takes f4, and black should be fine. So, anyways, that's what I would say. I'm not too worried about it. I honestly, I just think this is helpful. I'll probably, doing this live on the stream, I'll probably never make this specific error again. But I'm actually sort of glad that I did, right? Because now I know, in a much more memorable way. In the Vienna Gambit, do not play knight to f6. This gives your opponent an eval advantage of 1.5. I was lucky enough that that the game turned out fine, but But anyways, that was the issue. So knight to f6, I basically taught myself not to play knight to f6 in the future. Interesting, interesting game, interesting thing to happen, and yeah. So I think I'm gonna let you guys continue on in the tournament. The tournament is basically going on. We're going into round 2 in a minute. And yeah, thank you all very much for playing. We're going to be doing a tournament after the lecture every day today, or every day from now on. After the morning lecture, there's going to be a tournament, and yeah, everyone's playing for kind of the tournament series. So you get a few points just for participating, and then you get more points for getting the first three results. And yes, so yeah, let me know. Cool. Thanks, Lord, and thanks everyone very much for being in this tournament. So yeah, I am looking at this, and that should be good. All right, cool. So everyone, I'm gonna conclude the stream. Thank you all very much for being here on the stream. Thank you all very much for sending your games, and thank you all very much for playing in the tournament. Very happy to see all the players in the tournament. This is great, 22 players. And yeah, we'll be doing this going forward. So good luck, everyone. I will update on the results of this tournament later today. And yeah, fun stuff. Thank you very much for being here. And the next stream is at 9:35 p.m. Eastern time tonight in about 11 and a half hours. Thanks a lot. Have a good day, everyone. Thanks. Bye.